Hi there, and welcome to episode 5 of the ADHD Adult UK podcast. I'm James Brown, the co-founder of ADHD Adult UK, and shamefully, sadly, pathetically, and rather boringly, I'm joined, of course, by my co-founder, Alex Connor.
What's cooking?
I'm just going to just gloss over that, Alex, and pretend you didn't say it because I'm starting to get irked by your hellos. How you doing? You all right?
Very well, actually. Thank you, James. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks post-COVID infection, so I'm feeling less fatigued. You can smell about half the things.
That's good. Did that sound sincere enough?
No, you don't. I know.
No, I really don't. Okay, so thank you for joining us. As usual, our podcasts are pretty much a tragedy in 3 parts. We choose a theme. So last week we talked about working memory. Just about remembered that the second before I said it. And this week we're talking about a different facet of the loss of executive function, those higher thinking skills that most people have, that we have in ADHD. And it's a thing that lots of people with ADHD struggle with. And it's the grand sounding time blindness. So the 3 parts that make up this tragedy are some evidence-based psychoeducation. So that's Alex and myself telling you about some information around what's happening in the brain, why time blindness might occur, things that might have an impact on it. Then we'll move on to some personal reflections, which this week are incredibly painful for me because it's been a tough week for time blindness.
Luckily, it's hilarious for me.
Brilliant. I'm so glad. I'm so glad, Alex. And then finally, we'll finish off with some top tips, but we'll also have the recurring sector of what's James forgotten this week. So to start us off, Alex, what is time blindness?
I really like the name time blindness. It's a Doctor Who title for sure. But the answer to what it is it isn't just one thing. Even more annoyingly, and I think this is familiar to loads of aspects of ADHD, the manifestation of the symptom can lead to very different behaviors depending on who you're talking about, which person has the ADHD. And that's often the case with, we know this is a symptom of ADHD, and how it manifests is completely the opposite in 2 different people. So that's hard. So in a nutshell, time blindness it's a weakness in how time is perceived by the ADHD brain, or any brain, but in us it's a bit rubbish. So that can include how long something takes to do, or how long we think it takes to do, or will. It can be how long something lasts when we're observing it, or how long it takes us to get to a place. So those are the symptoms. The manifestations of that could be your time blindness in ADHD. Could mean you're always late. Or it could be like me, that you were always and pathologically way too early to avoid being late because I don't want to upset someone, or because I'm embarrassed and when I'm horrendously late and I forget things.
Same here.
It's really common. It can also lead to poor estimates of how long a job will take, and that leads to over-promising, which I've never met an adult with ADHD that doesn't sometimes have that horrible, I've over-promised again. I thought I'd be a person that can do that in the future, or in this case, have time to do that. Days, weeks, months, this can be meaningless, as in I can do that in a month from now. It's almost literally meaningless to a lot of adults with ADHD. So the inability to perceive time as well seems to be one of the factors of ADHD. Compare it to hyperactivity, which often declines. Time blindness seems to remain as ADHD children become the fantastic ADHD adults. There's loads of studies out there in the science, James. I know you've read them as well as I do. I know, James, everybody pretends not to know this. He's read them. Evaluation of time blindness seems that adults don't just have difficulty with estimating time. They may feel that time is passing really slowly or really fast, or they can't do some complete tasks accurately. And go on.
Well, that can often be task related, can't it? Because one of the things that's quite common is that if you have to complete a task and it's a task that's not going to give you that instant immediate reward which makes you want to do it, then your perception of how long time is passing while you're trying to do that task can be completely off.
It's such a good point. And actually there's some really ace science, which is it was a small cohort, but they showed pictures to adults with ADHD and then ordinary people. And they asked them, which picture did I hold up for the longest? And we're bad at that. We're bad at going, I think the picture A of a horse and picture B of a chair. I think I don't know which one it was. For me, it would for ADHD people, it would be the one that held my interest the longest. I felt that was short, and the one, whereas ordinary people were much better at saying objectively, oh, it was B or A. And here's the amazing thing, which is based on exactly what you just said, James. If the picture had an emotional response to the observer, to the person, not only did it change, but actually the adults with ADHD were better at estimating how long the time was than the ordinary people, which suggests exactly what you're saying, doesn't it? That we need an emotional reason for doing this, like with all blooming ADHD effects.
What that suggests to me is, and I know again we use dopamine as a shorthand for the deficits we have in ADHD, but what that suggests is that emotional response or connection or reward is going to possibly be affecting the way in which those chemicals in the brain, which are dysregulated in ADHD, work, and that may temporarily, ironically, improve our perception of time, because the areas where they're not working normally are suddenly getting a little bit of extra activity. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. I think in the same way that we're always banging on that ADHD isn't a deficit of attention, it's an inability to what we pay attention to. I think it's similar here, that time blindness affects us because in normal cultural life, you have to know how long boring stuff takes. But actually, we'd be much better if it was emotional stuff we had to plan time of. But remembering you've got to get there for 9 o'clock and this thing takes 5 minutes that I don't want to do anyway, it's very difficult for us. And that's what we mean when we say time blindness.
What I find interesting is it is difficult for us, but we can spot it in other people. So I'm going to give this is a personal reflection, and we do move on to that later on. But this is a specific example of how one individual's inability to perceive time when they've got ADHD can be compensated by another. So I told Alex once a story about how I had booked myself in to have a haircut, and we were having a meeting with somebody. I think it was about an hour and a half later or something. And of course, I ended up being massively late. And I messaged him, and he just replied saying, at what point did you think you were actually going to make it to that meeting when you booked that haircut? So it was obvious to you when you looked at the fact of when I'd booked it and when the meeting was. But to me, not at all. I was definitely going to just go get my haircut, jump in the car, get home, and make the meeting. It didn't even cross my mind that would not be chronologically or temporally possible.
I'd even written in my diary, James won't be here. And actually, this leads to my top tip for later, which is really interesting. So what I do about the fact, how to deal with the fact that I struggle with time is my top tip for what I do.
I'm looking forward to hearing that. I think before we move on to the second section, when we talk about personal reflections, I want to ask your opinion on something which has been reported in the scientific literature, but which I personally, anecdotally, haven't found works with me. And that is that treatment with the typical ADHD medications can normalize perception of time. Now, obviously, again, there's this big asterisk that individuals with ADHD, we're not all the same. We're not a homogenous group of people who all present with exactly the same behavior traits and coexisting conditions. Some of us have better working memory than others. Some of us have better executive function than others. But I did find it interesting when I read that treatments, largely, again, which will correct dopamine levels in the brain, can normalize time perception in ADHD. And for me, now I'm a medicated and better managed adult with ADHD, my time management is just as bad. My time blindness, I literally cannot look at what I'm doing until the night before in my diary, because if it's 3 days in advance, as you said, that's meaningless. I don't know what that means.
I think the answer is that there are different facets of time blindness that the medicine will help with and the medicine won't help with. I don't think it will help with that 4 days from now, because in a way that isn't really time blindness. Rather, it's the inability to plan things or to commit to planning things. Whereas what I have noticed with mine, anecdotal, everybody, not evidence, is that I don't get as cripplingly bored in just a 5-minute talk by someone if I'm medicated, and therefore the time doesn't seem to be forever and a day.
Is there a crossover there? There clearly is an element of time perception there, because it feels like time is moving slowly. But is there also an element of focus there, that you're more able to pay attention and therefore emotionally connect. I mean, again, I'm not sure what the literature says about this, because I don't think anybody's specifically looked at those facets when somebody is treated. I gave a bad example of time blindness because as I'm going to tell you about my personal reflection, clearly now I'm medicated, literally cannot work out how long something is going to take and where I need to be somewhere. And I'm still pathologically early everywhere. And again, this is a personal anecdotal story, and it may be for you, once you get treated, or if you're treated, that you're far more able to perceive time as a concept and manage time than I. But for me, it's not helped at all.
I'm going to spend this week finding out. I'm going to try and pay attention to it, because I don't think I've been looking, frankly.
That's a good idea. And if we can remember to, let's see if we can get you to report back next week. Okay, everybody. That's the end of part 1. We're going to move on in part 2 to talk about some of our personal reflections of living with time blindness. Welcome back to episode 5 of the ADHD Adult UK podcast. And in this episode, we're talking about time blindness. In part 2, we tend to talk about our personal reflections, what it's like to live with time blindness. So, Alex, have you got any stories you'd like to share?
No, thanks, James.
Okay, cheers. So,
it was just very serious. I liked it. So the thing about time blindness before and after ADHD diagnosis was, it just surprised me. I don't think I'd ever really heard about it as a concept. I love that it's got a name, but I always knew I was crap at it, crap at guessing times, crap at planning things, crap at remembering stuff. I didn't realize it was part of a disorder, and I certainly didn't think I had that. I thought I just wasn't concentrating properly. And again, I thought I wasn't a real boy. It's my Pinocchio syndrome. And now I know it is. It's really, really prevalent. I remember reading about Albert Einstein trying to explain what time relativity was. Please don't leave us. He said something like...
Our listeners just went down from 10 to 5 when he said that.
Yeah. But those 5 are very excited about this story. Einstein said something like, an hour with a beautiful lady feels shorter than a second with your finger stuck on a hot stove, and that's relativity, he said. And life has always been like that for me, of feeling real pain in just 5-minute things. But it's not a hot stove for me. It's literally any activity I'm not interested in. And instead of an hour with a beautiful lady, it's an hour with your mum, James.
My mum's a saint, Alex, I'll have you know. And she's also physically stronger than you. So
yeah, that doesn't narrow it down. Many people are. And that's the key to my time blindness. It's everything seems to take ages if I'm not fully interested, and that is physically painful. Like sitting in an audience, being a spectator, doing anything I've just time, even a minute drags. Whereas sometimes 2 hours goes flying by when I'm researching, Tudor monarchs in order when I'm supposed to be doing something else. Is that something tell us about yours? Then? Is it the same for you?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I'm always sorry. What was that? I've completely lost my train of thought. You've lost.
I love this. What we're
researching Tudor. What was that?
Tudor monarch behaviour. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're not interested in 16th century geopolitics, James. I can't really be friends with you anymore.
That's more of a hobby than a vocation for me, Al. My time blindness is in many ways manifest. I'm pathologically early for everything. This causes problems in my relationship because my wife, God bless her, likes to take her time to do things. So the one time I can guarantee you 100% dollars to donuts, bet my nads on it, we are going to argue is when we fly somewhere, because I will want to get up and get to the airport 2 hours before that flight leaves because I am so scared, so anxious we're going to miss a flight, which of course we've done several times.
Me too.
And I think we should have an ADHD miles card for the different airlines that we've managed to miss flights on. I'm sure it should be.
I've been so early. I was once in the lounge of an airport. I was there so early that it wasn't open and they wouldn't let me in. You can't be there for 4 hours.
But that to me is perfect. I'd rather get there and sit down and be comfortable. Whereas my wife will be slowly putting, skin lotion on and looking at me as I'm shaking with rage, looking at it and looking at my watch saying, can we go? Now, My anxiety then makes her anxious, and then her anxiety makes me anxious. So it's awful. It's awful.
I feel sick just thinking about that. Yeah.
Honestly, it's horrible. So that's one way in which it manifests. But the personal reflection I really want to talk about is my horror story from this week. And I'm not going to go through the whole story, but the whole story started largely because of time blindness. So I had the opportunity to travel down to London to speak to some politicians. And I normally dress like a tramp, so I needed to be smartly dressed and make sure I got everything with me. And I thought I'd prepared properly. But as it turns out, and we will talk about this in my What Has James Forgotten or Lost this week later on, it turns out that I didn't bring my suit trousers to work with me. No. So I was dressed like Steptoe in a hoodie and jeans and the same Adidas trainers I've got on today. But the time blindness element is I didn't think to check that I'd got my suit and that it still fitted, because I haven't worn it for 2 years, until 35 minutes before my train left. And 2 hours before my train left, I actually did kind of think, right, I'll go and get a suit in a bit. But that hour and a half went like that. And I was chatting to people and doing a bit of work thinking, I've got ages. I've got 35 minutes. Then when I discovered that I didn't have the trousers, a whole awful melee of trying to get hold of a suit, which finally I managed to successfully do whilst losing my wife's bank card in a shop. It's all on Instagram if you want to listen to the awful video. And then all the emotional self-chastisement, and then having to go and speak to these politicians in a messed up state, all came from time blindness. It all came from me literally having no idea what would be a reasonable time for me to try my suit on, make sure I've got it, and get to the train station. I was just so unaware of time passing that all of a sudden it was, half an hour leaving, better get my suit on. And of course, I only had half of it.
It's so interesting. I don't think I'd realised when you told me, A, that you weren't just not wearing trousers in the story. I assumed you were in your pants. And B, that it's all because of that time blindness. If you'd have just prepared 2 hours before, but we've got ADHD, we can't. And
no, but like you said, we're going to give people tips, which clearly I can't apply to myself, which can help us with time blindness. But if I just, we'll talk about it later. If I just set a reminder as a basic thing, maybe that would have helped me. But I didn't think I'd need to. One of the issues that complicates every issue we talk about in every episode, is adults with ADHD have poor metacognition. And what that means is we're bad at thinking about thinking. So we don't know how good or bad we are at doing things. If you ask an adult with ADHD how good or bad their working memory is, how good or bad their ability to do certain mental tasks is, you're likely to get a slightly inaccurate answer, because actually we're positive, right? Yeah, absolutely. We're not good at thinking about how we think. And therefore, I, for some reason, just thought it wouldn't be a problem. I didn't think, you always get this wrong, James, belt and braces. I thought well, we'll talk about that later because it's part of the game. But yes, it caused
literally
me,
belt and braces.
Yeah, it was just one of the worst days of my post ADHD life, and my poor, long-suffering wife had to put up with me being an absolute twat for the whole train journey, not speaking to her, but writing a series of tweets about what had happened, because I thought that was more important. It was horrible, Alex. It was horrible, and it all stemmed from time blindness.
It does. And last Saturday, I was with my running group, which will annoy you, I know. And we'd all agreed to wear the same T-shirts for reasons.
And it also annoys me.
Yeah. I only looked for mine 10 minutes before I had to leave the house. Couldn't find it. And so I let everyone down in the group photo. And the shape, like self-loathing, the shape wasn't important, but like the massive emotional reaction to it I just felt such self-hatred. It was a T-shirt, it didn't matter, but it mattered to me.
I think most of us will recognize that. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that, Alex. Before we move on to the final part of the show, we're gonna play our definitely going to be repeated every week regular section.
You remembered something,
which is called "What Did James Forget or Lose This Week?" And it's based around the fact that I have literally zero working memory. So the way in which the game works is that I give Alex 3 options, and he has to guess which one is correct. And he gets a score. He scored nought last week. He didn't manage to guess what I'd lost or forgotten. So you've got 3 options, and they're all trouser related, Alex, because clearly I did lose my trousers. But what I want you to try and guess is what actually happened to the trousers. So you've got 3 options. Option A is I just left them at home. Option B is I'd left them in the car. They'd fallen off the hanger, couldn't find them. And option C is I have no fucking idea.
I can definitely see. No question about it. But they're still gone. And the reason I know this is because there's still a cup of tea in your house somewhere.
No.
Ago.
So
it's probably next to a pair of trousers, isn't it?
As funny as it is for you to be correct, and as much as it devastates me to give you a point, you are correct. I've got no idea. Listen, it's possible that when I was moving my coat from the car to the office, they fell onto the floor somewhere, but I retraced my steps and nobody's handed them in. So my trousers have disappeared, Alex. And on that bombshell...
This sounds more like an alibi than,
Your Honour.
than a story, yeah.
Your Honour. And on that bomb...
But that is objective invisibility, isn't it, as well?
It is, yeah. It is, and we will do an episode on that soon. So on that
great idea. Maybe the next
we'll take a short break and we'll come back with our top tips and product
recommendation.
Welcome back, everybody, to the final part. Thankfully, I'm sure you're all saying, of episode 5 of the ADHD Adult UK podcast on time blindness. And the final part is always our top tips. So, ping pong ball head with glasses, Dr. Alex Connor, what are your top tips?
I've got one really, and it is a tip I use to essentially know the difference between when my disorder is making me be an arsehole to people. That's a bit of a harsh truth, but it isn't an excuse. This is a personal reflection. I'm not telling people what to think, but I am aware that some elements of ADHD can lead to antisocial behavior in relationships and at work, and I don't like that very much. But it's hard. It's hard to do because it is an executive function disorder. We don't want to be like this. So what I do is I align a emotional motivational reward with the consequences of being late or the lack of them. And what I mean by that is I try not to be late by caring about how somebody will feel if I am, or what that will feel like if I'm not, even better, because it's positive. And my best way not being late. Go on.
We're just saying, knowing that you have kind of borderline psychopathic traits, are you saying that you have to pretend to care about something or somehow generate an emotional attachment?
Well, I do. We all know that I have emotional difficulties with emotional empathy. I'm not very emotionally empathic, but I do care what people that I care about think and feel in the broader. So, and being validated is a good part of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So my best way of not being late, this is the top tip. And the first bit I appreciate is obvious and stupid, but I'm always early. And when you say pathologically early, I consider that a strength, James, genuinely. The problem, of course, is it's easy to say, I'm going to be early. It's not necessarily easy to do if you've got ADHD. My secret to being early, to make being early not physically painful, is that I have a constant little selection of mini tasks that I can do in periods when I'm early for something. This could be anything. It's up to you. Changing your energy supply, or doing the homework if you're doing an evening class and you've got a bit of homework to do for it, or filling in one tax return, or any thing you've got to do with your bank. That works with me because it's the classic ADHD task sandwich. I get 2 things for the price of 1 by being early. I'm not upsetting people, and then I get to do a shitty little task I don't, or my brain doesn't want to do, or rather I wants to do it but can't. And therefore I get the emotional reward for winning at what I call winning at jobs. It's jobs. Everything's jobs. In ADHD, I just want to play, and everything's jobs. And if I do 2 when I should be only getting the prize for 1, I'm winning at jobs, and I get an emotional reward for that. What about you, James? What's your top tip?
Okay, so my top tip is related very tangentially to the product recommendation, which I'll do afterwards. But my top tip would have genuinely helped me this week with the trouser debacle, and that is, most of us are now tech savvy enough to have a smartphone, maybe even a smartwatch or a computer or a smart speaker in our house. Just use it. You can set alarms and reminders and send yourself an invite in your calendar so you get any number of reminders that you need to start doing something now. So for example, applying this to this week's fucking trouser debacle, if I had set a reminder on my phone that said at 2:00, your train leaves in 2 hours, try your suit on, I would have probably ignored it. But if I'd have set another reminder 15 minutes later saying, you ignored the last reminder, go and try your suit on, at that point, I may have gone, actually, past James has got a point, I'm going to go and try my trousers on so future James doesn't look like an idiot. So use technology to your advantage. I know not everybody has money to afford all of these things, but you can get a smart speaker now for 20 quid. And most smartphones have the capacity to send you an alert or a reminder when you've got to do something. So use that to make up for your deficit. It's not going to improve your time blindness, but it is going to give you a framework in which you're not going to hate yourself for being late, or for missing things, or for not trying your trousers on half an hour before you go on a train.
Is there an app where I could just press a button and say, write me a to-do list that doesn't just record my voice, that translates that into So my access to work assessment included a specific dictation software which can do multiple things. We'll do an episode on apps and technical support for ADHD. Good idea. I'd love to know we've got a list on our website, by the way, under resources, which is ever growing, but there are loads of apps to support the various elements in terms of prioritizing, in terms of a to-do list, in terms of dictating, in terms of turning text to speech, so you don't have to read something, which might make it more easy to consume. There are loads of apps, so we will do an episode on that. And that leads me to my product recommendation. And this, if anything, is related to last week's episode. Because of my poor working memory, I obviously lose a lot of stuff. And my product recommendation this week is to use one of the various devices. There are lots of different providers. Tile are one. Apple do AirTags, which you can attach to important items so you can find them wherever they are. Now, the specific product, and the reason I'm doing this, I'll explain it, that I'm going to recommend is Apple AirTags. They're not cheap. So obviously, they're not for everybody, but you can get one AirTag for about 30 quid. If your keys are the most important thing that you lose often, you can attach it to your keys. And the value of getting an Apple AirTag over most of the Bluetooth trackers is that it actually uses the Apple network to GPS locate the thing that you've lost. So actually, if you lose your keys or your wallet in the train station and then go home, you won't be able to find it using Bluetooth. It might say the last location it was found at was, and therefore you can go back there. But if someone picks it up and it moves, then you won't find it. Whereas with an Apple AirTag, it will actually point on a map and say, this is where that thing you lost is, you idiot. Oh, that's amazing. So without having to have GPS of its own.
Exactly. And what I've actually purchased this week, because I needed a new wallet anyway, impulse purchase, Alex, as you always like to point out, is a wallet that has a little pouch in it for an Apple AirTag. So you can specifically, without having it make your wallet bulge, I can now, when I lose my wallet, which happens all the fucking time, I can just look on my phone and find where my wallet is. So that's this week's product.
Two questions. Do you have to have an iPhone to use an Apple iTag, or?
I think you do. I'm not entirely sure, but I think you do, because it uses the Apple network. Or if not, it will certainly work better. Yeah,
because I have the Aldi version, which are like 8 quid that don't do that.
Yeah.
The second question isn't for you, James. It's for anyone who's listening. Does anyone know of a generic one that would work with Android phones or Apple iPhones that does that? If you leave it, 4 miles away, will ping you. Does anybody know of any generic product? Because we would love to hear from you on any of our socials. That'd be fantastic. That's a really good.
And we'll share that. If you let us know, we'll share that in a post, and obviously not give you credit for it. We'll completely claim the credit for ourselves. No, we'll give you credit, obviously, if you send that with us. So that's product recommendation for the week. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I enjoyed this time blindness one. Did you?
It seemed to go very quickly, Al.
Yeah, which is that's a lesson. Very good. Right, so that was episode 5 of the ADHD Adult UK podcast, and it was about the executive dysfunction that is time blindness that adults with ADHD face. If you want to get in touch or give us any feedback, please be kind, or anything at all, you can contact us on ADHD Adult UK on all the social media things, Instagram and Twitter and the Facebooks and those kinds of things. You can read about time blindness on our online magazine, which is Focus UK. No, it's not. I've done it again. It's focusmag.uk, and there's a specific one on time blindness, but there's lots of other stories increasing every week as well, and some new reflections from some of our other contributors. So thank you for listening. Again, we really appreciate it, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
See you guys.